Welcome to the Honest Health Podcast with your host, Jeffrey Burke. Honest Health brings you the brightest minds in the natural products industry, as well as athletes and entertainers. Jeff will keep you entertained and informed while educating on how to be successful on your healthy journeys. Now, here's your host, Jeffrey Burke.
Hello and welcome back to the Honest Health Podcast. My name is Jeffrey Burke. I'm so glad you're here. Today we're going to be doing something fun, and fun for me means things that I love doing, and we're going to be talking about animals today. I mean, how cool is that? You guys know my two things, animals and food, my favorite two things in the world. So we're going to be talking about that today. Of course, I want to remind everybody, if you're tuning in for the first time, thank you for taking the time to tune in. If you're back again, maybe you've been one of my longtime 4-decade listeners. Thank you so much for being here on this new platform. Remember, you can go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com. You can tap on the Honest Health logo. It'll take you to Spotify for your audio listening. You can also tap on the YouTube logo and go and watch our interviews. And there's plenty of amazing interviews with the best in the industry at your fingertips. So I want to welcome my guest today. Dr. Robert Silver is with us today. Hey there, how are you, sir?
Great. It's great to be here today, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm so excited about this. Before I get started, I want to give you a little bit of a bio. And I'm reading the bio off the back of his book, which we're going to be talking about today. How cool is that? There's a mushroom for that. How cool. I'm so excited about that. Dr. Robert Silver is a world-renowned holistic and integrative veterinarian, author, speaker, and educated with over 4 decades of practical experience successfully treating pets with complicated chronic diseases. Dr. Silver is the Chief Veterinary Officer for Real Mushrooms, a Canadian functional mushroom company, and he owns and operates the Well-Pet Dispensary online health supplement source for nutraceuticals, herbs, THC-free cannabinoid therapeutics for pets. So I think I want to start today, if you don't mind, the status of animals in our life. You know, I've always grown up with animals my whole life, and they were just part of everyday living. But I got to tell you, animals today, they're family to me, and I have a lot of them. And to me, I make them part of my family. I think it's changed. I think the whole prospect has changed on how we look at animals today.
Well, it really has. And a lot of it, I think, is due, in fact, to changes in our culture and an increased urbanization of our culture as well, and moving away from kind of the ranch culture and the farm culture where we did treat animals as property or as working animals as part of the picture there. And so and then we're seeing more and more families, couples are waiting to have children later on, or perhaps even not having children, and instead of having pets, so their pets become their four-legged family members. And in fact, all the marketers out there, they have a word for this. If you've noticed all these ads directed towards pets that seem to be talking as though their pets are our children, they call it the humanization of pets. And it's a real thing. And that's one reason why the marketers are really focusing on this pet space, which is currently the most actively growing marketplace in the natural products industry, is the pet supplements.
Let me ask you a question. Is it smart to start maybe looking at supplementation for our animals at the point when they may be in need of it? Or is it like the way that we do things, we think preventively and we start doing things ahead of time? Is it okay to start supplementation with your animals when they're very young as a preventive measure?
Well, it's not only okay, it might actually be very, very crucial to improving their health, especially if the pet is being put on one of these very ultra processed foods that are so widely available, through grocery stores and everything else. They've been great in terms of feeding the masses, but in terms of the actual, nutrient value, they're excessively processed. And so they fit into that same category that we're talking about these days with human foods that are ultra processed and all the negative health effects that come from ultra processed foods. So yes, in the case of, and many times people for economic reasons, for time, convenience reasons, they reach for that bag of kibble.
Yeah.
I understand. I do too at times, but so that's where I think supplements can really be valuable, is when you're eating a diet that basically has empty calories. They fill it up with, they've got, a vitamin mix that they fill in there, but it's not the same as getting, your naturopathic physician. It's not the same as getting your nutrients from the whole plant, from the whole animal, from the whole food, versus from an isolated, processed, piece of it.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and you were talking about animals in the wild, how they just know what to do. If they have stomach upset, they eat grass, and they look for things that are wildly growing because they know what they should do. They listen to their bodies, and when we domesticate it, we put all of the responsibility onto us, and sometimes we don't do our homework, and then we're bewildered and we don't know which way to go. So, I mean, I love the idea of the industry growing this sector, because I think it's really important, because I think our animals are worth it.
Well, I agree with you. And I think animals provide, and pets in particular, they provide a resource, an emotional resource for humans that really is unparalleled. Especially these days, humans are becoming more and more alienated from each other, with politics, with cultural issues, all those things. Animals, they're always there. You could leave your house for 5 minutes, come back in. It's been like you've been gone for a week, and it's the
True.
best thing ever. Who doesn't love that?
Exactly.
Really.
No, it's so true. And I have 5 French bulldogs and 2
Oh,
border collies, and
okay.
it's a thing. If I go to the mailbox and I come back, it's like party time. It's like, where have you been? I've missed you so much. And I'm like, really? I've been just gone for a minute. And but you know what? I never second guess it. I always appreciate it. My problem is that our animals don't live long enough.
Well, yeah.
And if we can do things that may help them be healthier and maybe be here longer,
Hmm.
for their longevity, then we should start thinking about nutrition. And I think the biggest problem is people don't know where to start.
Well, they don't. But at the same time, many holistic veterinarians and holistic pet, and there's a whole new category of advisor to regarding pets health, called pet health coach advisors. And these are basically lay people who are learning and being and training to be able to understand how to provide nutrient rich foods, and what supplements can be helpful as well. And so, yeah, I think it's a very important thing that we look at the health span of our animals. And the longevity topic has got to be really big in the pet space, because pets don't live very long. And of course, we're seeing this in the human space as well. Humans don't live very long either, but pets even less. And so, about whatever we can do, and we when we talk about longevity, we really talk more about health span. How long is that animal going to be healthy before it starts declining with disease? And oftentimes, some of the diseases that pets get can be very life altering. As far as the terminal nature, or the just how ill it can make them, and then the financial resources that the family needs to muster up. And of course, looking at your beloved pet, who may be a geriatric at that point in time, and your family's been there, as part of your family for 10 or 15 years, and it has to have surgery to disfigure it because it's got a cancer of the jaw or something. So yeah, its health span is really important, and that's where good nutrition comes in, and that's where using supplements to fill the gaps where the good nutrition can't go. Because we're dealing with a lot of issues these days with depletion of soil. Where when you look at studies in terms of, even the USDA has studies showing how depleted spinach is, from factory farming, from how it had been back in the 50s, the 40s and 50s, in terms of our factory farming. So I think that supplements do play a very important role in terms of filling those blank spaces that the diets, whatever it is we're feeding ourselves or feeding our pets, can't fill.
Well, and I think 2 areas that I think are probably the most noticeable, that people, see a change in their animals, is inflammation, which causes pain, which affects mobility. And the second one is digestive. the gut. And there could be more. I'm sure there are more, but it seems like those two are kind of like headliners, with our animals.
Well, they are, but the pet parent, which we prefer to use in versus pet owner because we're trying to shift the conversation, to them being part of our family versus just being property.
Yes.
The and my digression caused me to lose that train of thought, but the I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay. We're hitting on these areas that people ask me about, which is inflammation and gut.
Oh, okay. There we go. So the pet owner, they don't really quite understand what inflammation is, and although gut is, kind of a generic term, what they're looking at is a diarrhea on the carpet.
Yes.
What they're looking at is that tumor, on the back that is interfering with its movement of its jaw, or they're seeing that it can't get up on the couch anymore or go up the stairs. So it looks at these complaints, at these pain points we speak of that need to be fixed, and that's where looking at improving the health of the gut through better food or through supplements that help to improve gut health, even something simple like ginger root, is so very important. That's where looking at mobility and how we can reduce inflammation to improve mobility comes in as well. And that's where looking at supplements, sometimes, I'm an integrative practitioner when it comes to veterinary medicine. So I'm not against the use of pharmaceuticals. I think there's a time and a place for them. I think they've gotten a bad rap because I think they're overused, and I think they're used inappropriately, and because the conventional veterinarians, conventional healthcare practitioners aren't really schooled in the alternatives that work as well, in many cases better than pharmaceuticals, and don't have all the adverse side effects. I think a blend of appropriate pharmaceuticals, appropriate herbs, nutraceuticals, supplements, and diet create a much better health span in our critters, than just using pharmaceuticals and using, highly processed commercial foods. And that's where, and not meaning to digress too much, but that's really where that book came in, because I felt there was a need. There's so little information out there about the practical use of these mushrooms, about cannabinoids, about diets and herbs, and I wanted to put it all together into one place that would be helpful for the pet parent and have the book organized based on complaint,
Well,
because,
I think it's wonderful. I received my book 2 days ago. I've already read it.
really,
I'm a really fast reader and I love it, but I'll be going back and reading it again.
Okay.
But what I'll tell you, the thing about it is that I've noticed is that although I've been doing literally tens of thousands of radio shows over my career, the hardest thing in the world has been for me to get the idea of functional mushrooms to really take hold. And they are taking hold now. They're taking hold really well, and people are, around the world, they're like here and over here, they're here, but we're getting better. And so my idea is, I as I was reading this, I kept thinking to myself, I never thought of functional mushrooms for my animals. And it was a really brain opening for me, to realize that things that I'm using could also be beneficial for my critters. And but thank you for this book. I love it. And I think it's going to be really good for people that are really those pet people, those pet parents, those people that really want their critters, their fur babies to be healthy as possible. And, and there's a lot of us out here, and I have a friend of mine and she has 4 dogs, and her kids laugh and they're like, you didn't treat us as good as you treat your dogs. And that's probably true, but the thing is, I think the problem is getting started. So let's say we're creating a protocol. Number one is the actual food that you use. Are you a big believer in the fresh foods that are available now? Or are there kibbles that you feel comfortable with?
I don't really feel comfortable with kibbles at all. I think kibbles, fit that ultra processed food category.
Mm-hmm.
I think they can be a necessary evil. I think into every life a little kibble must fall just out of convenience. I have some kibble that, I've been feeding all of my dogs, fresh from scratch food every day. But, some days you just don't have that wherewithal, or you're traveling or whatever it is. So that's when we look at, adding, some kibble. I'll add water to the kibble. I add some canned food to it. I'll add supplements to it all to try to improve it, because it is, it is convenient and easy to do. But, I think that when we look at foods, we want to try to feed the most wholesome food possible. And although there are people who are very strong advocates of raw food, in the sense that they feel that that's what you have to feed because it's so unprocessed. They talk about enzymes in the food that actually improve the digestion process itself. But the reality is that not everyone is able to do raw food feeding. Raw food feeding can take special considerations regarding hygiene and where you're sourcing the food, as far as the possibility of some sort of a pathogenic bacterial contamination, which isn't that common, but nonetheless is something that we need to look at. And some people are frightened to use raw food because of the fear of foodborne pathogens. And so when I was in practice, I'm not in practice now, but I try to adapt the diet to the person, versus adapting the person to the diet, because every household has different needs and different considerations. And for some households, cooking the food is important because they've got maybe babies crawling around the floor, or they just don't like the idea of feeding raw food. There's nothing wrong with kitchen temperatures to cook a food. Lightly cooking it helps. And in some cases, I don't agree entirely with the raw food proponents that the raw food has enzymes that help it digest, because there are some types of foods that are better off lightly cooked. I read a study where they compared the value of raw broccoli to lightly steamed broccoli, and lightly steamed broccoli had released more of its active ingredients, the sulforaphanes that we know are so important in broccoli to improve as an antioxidant, to improve immune system function and everything else. So, I think it's really, and the most important part of a diet is that it is given consistently on a day-to-day basis. And if you make it hard for the pet parent to do that, it ain't going to happen. Life is complicated these days, very complicated these days. And there's a lot of things that are very distracting in the news, So you have to keep it, you have to be able to, it has to be repeatable, it has to be simple, but it also has to be nutritious. And so, I also talk about the table scrap diet, not uncommonly, because in households where you eat really well and you prepare good food, there's no reason why you have to prepare food twice. Why not prepare the same basic ingredients but use different proportions for the pet, which match their nutritional needs, but the foods are still good. You've got a good whole grain, you've got, lightly steamed vegetables, you've got a decent source of protein, be it, animal or vegetable, and, you can put it together specifically for the pet. And it just, to keep things simple usually means they're going to be likely to happen.
Two quick questions, and then I want to get into supplements. The first
Sure.
one is, do you believe in giving chicken bones to dogs?
Well, okay, so yes, I believe that bones can be safe for a dog to eat, but the bones have got to be raw, and it's the smaller bones when we're talking about chickens. Now, these days, unfortunately, with avian flu, there's some risk actually associated with feeding raw chicken, mostly with the cats we're seeing now. With dogs, we're not really seeing any evidence of avian flu infecting dogs, whereas with cats, it's causing fatalities. So, so we have to look at that as well, as far as what we're actually feeding. But the wings, the wings of the chicken, the necks of the chicken, and the lower back of the chicken, in particular, are cancellous bone, not cortical bone. So it doesn't splinter, and the dog can chew it and digest it just fine. Those big marrow bones that are just nothing but cortical bone, even raw, they're a little better. I think the joints, the knuckle bones, the epiphysis of the bone is better, but the big shaft of the bone, when it's cooked especially, can splinter. But even raw is more difficult, and if it doesn't splinter and cause problems, sometimes the bones can actually cause fractures of the teeth. Even though dogs are built with teeth to chew bones, Some of them, like maybe your little Frenchies, they've got this shortened mouth. They're not really set to have the kind of, vise-like grip that maybe a German Shepherd might have on a bone. So got to watch it. So for the Frenchies, I would look at using chicken necks, chicken backs, chicken wings, raw for them. And I would start, with a little bit and make sure that they're okay, because many dogs that are domesticated and raised eating kibble don't really know how to chew bones right safely.
That's a
So
really good point.
it's they learn that from their mom when they're in the wild. But if you're just if they've been adopted out from the litter and they're weaned and you just think it's a cool thing to give them a bone, they've never had one before, it could be a problem as well. So you can get chicken necks, assuming, and ignoring my conversation regarding avian flu, but you can get chicken necks and you can actually cut them into smaller pieces so that your Frenchies don't have as large a commitment to that bone, so you can see how well they do with it, because it still can cause choking, if they don't know how to break it down with their teeth.
I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarity. The other question that comes from one of my listeners, because she knew that you were coming on, she wanted to ask your advice and your ideas on rawhide.
Boy, they sure like that rawhide, don't they?
They do.
Yeah. My concern is the chemicals that are used in the tanning of it or whatever they're doing to process it. And I think that there are some companies out there who are aware of that and who have created, some alternative types of rawhide that are better. I took my dog into the groomers recently because he's a outdoor lab type, but he was just filthy, and I had to have him all brushed out and everything. And they now have these freeze dried or dehydrated body parts of like duck heads, or duck esophaguses or things like that, which are great, which he really loves and look to be relatively safer, than perhaps rawhide could be. And then the pizzles, pizzles are different than rawhide. Pizzles are beef penises that are dry, and they still have, I think, a little bit of that urine smell to them. Because when a dog starts chewing down on them, if you've ever smelled that odor with these pizzles, but they're also quite tasty as well. But and pig's ears, we're seeing there are cases of salmonella being passed in these body parts. So so I think they can be good to feed, and some of these raw feeders really get into all these different animal body parts. And they can be okay, but it's really also individual with the dog itself. So I would look for healthier, if such a thing exists, rawhides, in the marketplace, and you'll find something there that, if the company is saying not using chemicals, this and that, I think it would be a better quality. But it gives them something to do. Dogs like to use their mouths. It's part of their culture, so to speak. And and especially if you're busy and you've got a busy life and you have to leave for work, and you need something to keep the animal occupied. And maybe there's separation anxiety.
Oh, there you go.
Leave the house. It could also be good in that regards as well. Although there are other ways of dealing with separation anxiety, like for instance, those little Kong, and I don't mean to promote that company, but those little they're the little hard rubber toys that have holes in them that you can stuff with things like peanut butter, or little dog biscuits, or little pieces of food or things like that you can hide around the house. For dogs that have separation anxiety, oftentimes you make it to a game. They don't notice you're leaving because they know it's time to go try to find the Kong that has the food in it. So there's other ways to deal. That would be one way to deal with separation anxiety that I recommend.
Talk about incorporating in functional mushrooms. Where do you start? I mean, it's kind of the same conversation I have with people that are going into a health food store for the first time, and they're looking at all of these beautiful functional mushrooms, and they're just like, I don't know where to start. How do you start with your dogs?
Well, I'm really, in many ways, I'm forging new territory here. Mm-hmm. Functional mushrooms have been used for centuries by humans, for health, and edible mushrooms, which oftentimes are also functional. Even those little white button mushrooms have great immune system benefits. But Animals, no, we don't know anything about it. There's a copious amount of studies out there about mushrooms in humans or in laboratory animals. There's maybe 4 or 5 total in dogs, and none in cats. And I've actually recently done a pilot study in horses. So I really had to kind of start doing what I've normally done over the 40 years of my practice, which is take information about supplements that are being used for humans and extrapolate that into dogs and cats. And from that, I've had experience of over 25 years formulating very effective products for pets. But because again, it's uncharted territory, I've started at the human realm and have extrapolated. So to answer your question, mushrooms are superfoods. I think the more I learn about mushrooms, the more I think they are essential parts of a healthy diet. Because they're not just one thing. They're not just a beta glucan. They have a wide variety of active ingredients, including excellent fiber that feeds the microbiome. So to me, any mushroom is a great place to start. If you have a good source for it. We like, having mushrooms be part of the diet is a good idea, but mushrooms need to be cooked in order for them to be best utilized by the body, whether you're a human, you're an animal, because the mushroom has this really fibrous cell wall that kind of keeps all the goodies inside. And in fact, the fibrous cell wall is one of the goodies, of the mushroom, because it contains the beta glucans and the chitin. So that's why we want to cook them at least 15 minutes if you're sauteing them or boiling them. But even longer, in terms of the Real Mushrooms Company, we cultivate our own mushrooms. We cultivate quite a bit of them, and we hot water process them just in the old traditional way that has been used for centuries in Chinese medicine. Basically, we make a soup out of it, or it's called decoction. And so we'll heat them at 90 degrees centigrade, nearly boiling, for 2 hours, which is enough to break down that cell wall to make it more bioavailable. So really any mushroom is fine, and we're familiar with mushrooms like shiitake, love that taste. One of the most potent, of the functional mushrooms as well. It's a great place to start, or, even even little button mushrooms. Real Mushrooms has taken, the mushrooms that they cultivate and created a mushroom blend, which gives you a little bit of 5 different mushrooms. And to me, that's probably the best place to start. And it's their most popular product. It's called the 5 Defenders. But to me, that's the best place to start because it gives you kind of a shotgun approach. And for wellness, I think that's a great approach. If you're dealing with frank disease, then and you want to kind of escalate the amount of an individual mushroom because you read a study that said that mushroom was good for this problem that we're trying to treat, then you're going to have to give an awful lot of a 5 blended mushroom where there's only 20% of each of them in this, and you may want to give an individual mushroom for a specific condition. And that's kind of where the title of the book comes from. Yeah, there's a mushroom for that. You've got arthritis. There's a mushroom. No, arthritis is probably not the best example, but we do have mushrooms that have analgesic properties and anti-inflammatory properties, so they would be good partners if you had, if you're doing a multimodal approach to arthritis, which might include some glucosamine, might include some anti-inflammatory herbs like boswellia, and we could put some mushrooms in there like cordyceps or reishi, which have been shown in studies in laboratory animals to have an ability to reduce pain or have more analgesic properties. So it's that's why that book's 400 pages, because it's not a
it's a good read
answer. Yeah.
No, it's a really good read, and you really kind of draw us in as the reader, where you're involved in it. It's just not overly technical, but there's plenty of technical in it. But it's also a really good read where you're following it and you're taking it, you're taking advantage of the information. So I loved it. It was a great read.
Well, thank you. prior to writing this book, I read a lot of technical materials, primarily for veterinarians. And so that was the real challenge with writing it. I didn't want to dumb it down. And I know that there's a lot of pet parents that are actually citizen scientists that want that data. There's like, I think 75, actual literature citations in it. So I wanted to give a little bit of each. I wanted to keep the language plain and simple and understandable, but I also wanted to have more in-depth discussions, which, you don't have to read the book from cover to cover. It's the kind of book where you could pick it up, your animal has a problem, you could read about the problem and get understanding of it. Or you might say, well, gee, he's recommending these mushrooms. It actually has some reference material in it because there's nothing out there like this book that has that kind of compendium of information about 12 different mushrooms. So it's a reference section. It's like I call it a materia medica, but it's like an encyclopedia of these 12 mushrooms. But then and the book, we ostensibly it's about mushrooms, but really the book started when I was doing an update of my book on cannabis, the one I call Medical Marijuana for Your Pet. It was outdated because I'd written that in 2015, and there's so many more studies since. So I started updating it, and then that's when I started working with real mushrooms and realized how popular mushrooms are, and so that's where I added the mushrooms to it. So the book also contains information about how to use CBD, how to dose it, and one area that I feel particularly expert in that very few people have spoken about is using cannabinoids in combination with mushrooms, because the two of them have a lot of similarities and there's a lot of synergy when you can use them together. For instance, I've created a soft chew. These are these tasty little treats for pets that is for relaxation. And it has lion's mane in it, which we know is kind of a calming mushroom. And it has reishi in it as well, which many people don't realize has been used for centuries by Zen masters as a meditation aid, because it has a very grounding influence on you. But I also put, tryptophan and things like that. And so, something like that would be, would be a very good approach, to calming, in a pet using that sort of a formula. So it was an interesting for me to write that book and I rewrote it probably 10 times before I got it right, trying to get the language correct, just right for so pet parents could understand it. But I think it's also a good entry level for veterinarians, or for professionals who would like to see how this works in pets, and has some basic information about the mushrooms and cannabinoids.
I love it. I mean, I love it as a reference. I mean, I've already referred back to it with a question when somebody had emailed me, and I referred to it, and I was like, okay, that's what I thought as well. But I used it as a reference book, and I think that's the way it's going to be. So when you pick up the book, read through it, read it at your own pace, concentrate more on the areas that are maybe more applicable to your critters, and then realize that you can go back and refer to this because things change. Our health changes, their health changes, life changes, they get older. There's going to be situations that, we need our vets. We really do. But we also need to be aware of some things that we could possibly do. I mean, years ago, I learned that if my dog is having an upset stomach or diarrhea, I give them pumpkin. I mean, I learned that years ago from a holistic vet that I knew, and I give them pumpkin. And I mean, it is amazing. And I give my animal probiotics every single day. They get fruit like berries, blueberries. They love blueberries, and they get coconut oil and they get greens. And they're spoiled rotten. And
well, actually, no, they're not spoiled rotten. They're treated right. You're doing the right thing there, Jeff.
It's like
not
our
spoiling
horses.
them at all.
My horses, I've got horses in their mid to late 20s and 30, and my friends are like, why are your horses living so long? And I said, well, they're happy and they're healthy and they're living their best life now.
This is true.
I think that taking the extra time for your animal really makes a big, big, big difference. You had mentioned cannabis, but also CBD. With animals, do you prefer using like the chew, or is liquid okay with them? Is putting a capsule in their food? Is there a preference that you like?
Well, I think the preference is to give it in a way that enhances absorption and enhances blood levels, which will enhance effectiveness.
Right.
And the studies show, whether you're a dog or a horse or a human or a rat, that if you give the CBD with food, you're going to have about a 5-time improvement, maybe 10-time improvement in blood levels. Because and especially if you give it with fatty food, because the CBD is such a fatty material, if you give it with fatty food, then it bypasses the liver. It goes in through the lymphatics, through the lacteals in the intestine, and dumps into the vena cava, bypassing the liver, because that's what happens with CBD. Normally is that it goes right to the liver, and the liver detoxifies it immediately, which lowers its levels in the bloodstream, which lowers its ability to affect. And that's why because the big complaint I get with CBD is, well, it doesn't work, or I tried it and it didn't work. I tried one, and I'm always surprised people are using 1 or 2 drops. You have to give a substantial amount. You have to give enough CBD based on the body weight of the animal. And then sometimes you have to escalate that. I have a starting dosage that I use for CBD, which is pretty straightforward, about a quarter of a milligram of CBD per pound of, per pound of body weight in the dog twice daily. And we give that with a little bit of food. For a dog, I think the quintessential fatty food is canned cat food, which if you've got cats and you're feeding them canned cat food, and again, we're talking about an ultra processed food, but it is a common part of most pets' diet. I keep canned cat food here. I got several cats as well, and I use it mainly as a treat to administer supplements to my dog, who has a little bit of PTSD. So every time I come to him with a supplement, he looks at me like I'm trying to kill him. But he's a lab, so he's a real foodie. So I've just learned. I just put in a little bit of canned cat food. But it turns out canned cat food is also the best fatty food. But you could use butter, you could use cream, you could use peanut butter, you could use some hamburger, especially fatty hamburger, whether it's raw or cooked, to administer it. But that would be the way to go. And we would start with that quarter of a mg per pound twice daily in food, and you'd give it for about a week or 2, because that's how long the studies show it takes to develop a steady state in the blood, which means you've got good tissue penetration of it, which means if it's going to work, it's likely to work at that level. If it doesn't work after a week or 2, then I recommend doubling that dosage and see if that works. And that the studies have been done for the safety in CBD in dogs that show that you can give as much as 63 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. That would be like the same as maybe 30 milligrams of CBD for each pound. That's a huge amount. And that is considered to be safe. So CBD is really quite safe. When you start adding the THC to your CBD product, that's where you can run into problems with dogs who are very, very sensitive to the adverse effects of THC. And this is because we have found that dogs have a very high concentration of receptors for THC in the part of their brain that governs balance. And so that's why we see dogs looking really unstable when they get into your stash, because the THC is not good for them. And unlike humans, that the THC doesn't affect our thermoregulation, doesn't affect our brainstem, doesn't affect our respiration or heart rate. In the dog, it does. And so, although we have very few cases where THC has killed a dog, it can do that, and it also makes them pretty uncomfortable. So that's where a type of CBD product that doesn't contain the THC but has all of the other cannabinoids and terpenes in, we call that broad spectrum, I think in many cases is better suited for dogs because of their sensitivity to THC.
So broad spectrum is like full spectrum, but without the THC, you get all the other benefits.
Yes, and and it's not as full spectrum as full spectrum is, because the chemical engineering approach to removing the THC will also remove a few other will reduce a few of the other things that are in that whole plant. And we have recognized that the whole plant extract has much more effectiveness in the body than a single isolated extract. Like if we used what they call CBD isolate, which is just like 99.7% pure CBD, it works, but you have to use a higher dosage, and there are a higher rate of side effects. But, if you're treating a horse, some of the studies in horses show you need 250 milligrams of CBD twice daily for a painful situation in a horse. It gets pretty pricey. So looking at isolates can give you a reasonable cost to dose your horse to reduce the pain. And, generally we treat them for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and then maybe you can reduce the dosage, reduce your cost as well. So, and I have all this information in the book, and
you sure do.
Yeah, and so it's a good resource because there's a lot of information out there that is just not true. People build up these urban myths. I don't know, through dispensaries, maybe through maybe too much THC use. Who knows?
Possible.
But I just want to dispel some of the myths, and it's unfortunate because I think people, because it's simple. There's studies that show us how much to give. What's safe, what's the best route to give, and people still talk about giving it sublingually. Letting it absorb so it bypasses the liver, but it's a very poor route of administration, and you don't get the same kind of blood levels that you want to have if you give it with a little bit of fatty food, and it's so much easier to give it with food than trying to put that dropper in there, and it's going to get dirty with the saliva, and you got to wash it off before you put it back in the bottle because it'll introduce saliva to the bottle, which will contaminate it. So there's a lot of, and those are all practical tips that I put in there because I treated the book a lot like when I was in practice, that I would have these tapes, I call them, that I would talk, that I would explain things to the pet parents that were in my exam room. And I would always, and so I used that same kind of voice that I would use when I would speak to the client to explain things to them in the book. And there's stuff in the book, for instance, if a pet parent goes to the vet and the vet gives them some kind of diagnosis, and oftentimes the vets are in such a hurry, and I'm not putting vets down, I'm a vet, and I think vets are overworked and have a difficult job to do. But oftentimes the vets will talk really fast because they've got stacked up appointments. They need to get out of the exam room, and so they talk fast, and the pet parent doesn't get it. So in the book, for these 8 different conditions, allergies, arthritis, anxiety, cancer, bowel disease, epilepsy, and wellness, 7, but I have 2 stories, one about cats and dogs for anxiety. You need to. I keep losing that train of thought there, but sorry.
I just think I think that it comes down to having a conversation with people. The way that I looked at this book is that I felt like you and I were doing a sit down together.
Perfect.
That's the modality of it. It made me feel very comfortable.
So that really is that kind of intimate conversation that I often have. And I have those conversations. My digression was, I just got into the details of the book, but with each of those topics, I also explain what the conventional approach is. That's what your vet's talking to you about so fast that you're not going to be able to follow. Well, the book will help you to catch up on what he was saying. What are the conventional considerations? I think that there's a time and a place for going strictly with alternative medicine, and this is where I think with integrative medicine, because there's a lot of good things about conventional medicine when used appropriately, that we can blend with our complementary therapies, with our herbs to make everything work better, have fewer side effects, and have better outcomes.
Well, I have loved this so much. I hope you'll come back and see me again.
Oh, please invite me back.
I absolutely will. I thank you for the book. I want everybody to see the book again. There's a mushroom for that. Now, how do they get the book?
Well, it's available on Amazon.
Okay.
And that's probably the best place to get it. I also have it on my website where if someone wanted me to do a signed copy, I'll do a signed copy and ship it out directly to the person. It's a little more costly than Amazon because I can't really compete with their shipping prices, you know. So those are two approaches, and I can give you those links that you can perhaps post when you publish this podcast.
That would be great, and I definitely will do that. And I will post this the book on my social media as well, and remind everybody about it, because we all get overwhelmed. Do me a favor before we go. Leave everybody with a thought for the day on anything you'd like.
Okay. Dogs, come when cold. Cats, take a message and get back to you.
Ain't that the truth? Everything's on their time. One is so happy to have you around. The other one thinks you're their master. Yeah, so I agree with that.
This is true.
Thank you so much. My guest today, Dr. Robert Silva. The name of the book is There's a Mushroom for That. It's available on Amazon. When we post the podcast, I'll also put links in there where you can order the book directly in case you want a signed copy. Remind everybody, this is the Honest Health Podcast. Go to my webpage, drjeffreyburke.com. Remember, tap on the Honest Health logo to go to Spotify to listen, or go to the YouTube logo, and then you can watch the interview as well. But I thank everyone for being here today. Thank you so much for being my guest. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure, Jeff.
Have a great day, everybody. Do something great just for you and make it healthy. God bless.
Stay tuned for more information from the Honest Health Podcast with Jeffrey Burke. And make sure to check back often for interviews and conversations from the guests we all want to hear from. I'm John the Announcer. Thanks for listening.